My name is Maya Chen. I'm 31 years old. And on the morning of our annual company-wide meeting, the one I had spent 6 weeks organizing from the agenda down to the catered lunch, my sister stood at the front of the conference room, smiled at 62 employees, and announced that I was being eliminated from the organizational structure effective immediately. She used the phrase, streamlining for growth. She said it with the same calm she used to order coffee. I was sitting in the second row when she said it. I had my laptop open because I was the one running the slide deck. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up and flip the table the way the version of me from 5 years ago might have. I just closed the laptop, set it on the chair beside me, and watched my brother nod from across the room like he'd been rehearsing that nod all morning. Because he probably had. 3 weeks later, they were calling me every hour. Then every 30 minutes. Then my sister drove to my apartment at 11 at night and sat in her car outside for 40 minutes before she finally left. I want to tell you what happened in between. But first, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I genuinely want to know how far this thing travels. By the time I got home that afternoon, I had already received 4 texts from coworkers and 1 voicemail from our outside accountant, who had heard through the wall. I sat on my kitchen floor, with my back against the cabinet, not the couch, not the bed, the floor, because sometimes your body needs the hardest surface it can find to remember it's still real. My family owns ClearPath Logistics, a regional freight coordination company my parents built in Sacramento over 22 years. We handle routing, compliance documentation, and carrier management for mid-size manufacturers across the western states. It's not a glamorous business. It's the kind of business that runs on spreadsheets and federal regulations, and the specific kind of person who actually reads carrier contracts before signing them. That person was me. On paper, my title for the last 4 years had been Director of Systems and Compliance. In practice, I was the person who kept our entire technology infrastructure from becoming a very expensive disaster. I managed the transportation management software that routed every shipment. I maintained our carrier compliance database certifications, insurance documents, DOT numbers, safety ratings for over 200 active carriers. I handled EDI integrations with 6 of our top 10 clients, which is the kind of sentence that sounds boring until you understand that without it, invoices stop generating and clients stop paying. I negotiated our cybersecurity coverage renewal every year and had personally caught 2 potential data breach vulnerabilities before they became incidents. I built our backup server protocol from scratch after a ransomware attack on a competitor scared our largest client into demanding we prove our resilience. None of that appeared on the slide deck my sister used to announce my elimination. What appeared instead was a new organizational chart with my brother's name in a box that now encompassed everything I had been doing, retitled as VP of Technology and Operations. He had been VP of Sales. He does not know what EDI stands for. I found out later that they had been planning the restructuring for 2 months. I found out from my mother, who had known for 6 weeks and said nothing, because she believed my sister when she said it would be better coming from leadership. My mother apologized for that, in the way people apologize when they want credit for the apology more than they want to repair the damage. I thanked her and ended the call in under 4 minutes. Here is what my family's internal mythology looked like from the inside. My sister was the visionary. She had the business degree, the LinkedIn presence, the ability to walk into a room full of strangers and make them feel like she had been expecting them specifically. She could close a contract over dinner that took me 3 weeks of documentation to actually execute. My brother was the connector. Charming, loud, allergic to detail, genuinely beloved by clients who never had to depend on him for anything technical. He played golf with people who owned warehouses. That counted for a lot. I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on and the government didn't fine us. The family mythology did not have a flattering name for that role. The word I heard most often in that house growing up was reliable, said the way you'd describe a household appliance. The dishwasher is reliable. The internet connection is reliable. Maya is reliable. What they meant was, she'll handle it, and she won't make a scene. I sat on my kitchen floor for about 20 minutes. Then I stood up, made coffee, and opened my laptop. Not to fix anything, to document everything. I have a friend named Jordan who works in employment law and who has the useful quality of not softening things to protect your feelings. I called him first. He listened while I described the meeting, then asked one question. Did they offer severance? They had offered 2 weeks. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Then he said, Maya, how much of their operation runs through your personal credentials right now? I started listing. He stopped me after the 7th item. That's enough, he said. Write it all down. Everything. Then we talk. So I wrote it down. The Transportation Management System administrative login under my work email, which was about to be deactivated. Carrier compliance database built on a platform I had licensed and configured, with API keys registered to my professional account. EDI connection with our largest client, Hargrove Manufacturing, set up through a third-party integration I had contracted and maintained. Cybersecurity monitoring subscription auto-renewing through the corporate card I managed, with all alert notifications routed to my inbox. Federal Carrier Safety Rating Audit Tool annual license. Renewal date in 6 weeks. Credentials stored in a password manager I administered. Backup server access. 2-factor authentication linked to my phone number as the recovery contact. State regulatory filing reminders automated through a compliance calendar I had built in our project management software, which I also administered. The list went to 2 pages. None of this was secret. None of it was hidden on purpose. It had just accumulated over 4 years of being the person who set things up because nobody else was going to do it. Credentials go somewhere. Licenses live under someone's name. Integrations require a contact. That contact had been me so consistently that the company's operational nervous system had quietly grown around my access points, the way a tree grows around a fence post. I was not the face of ClearPath Logistics. I was the wiring inside the walls. 2 days after the meeting, I received an official termination letter by email. It was professionally worded and included the 2-week severance offer, contingent on signing a separation agreement. I forwarded it to Jordan without responding. On day 3, my brother called. He opened with, "Hey, so we're going to need you to do a knowledge transfer before your last day." I asked him what he meant by knowledge transfer. He said, "You know, walk me through the systems, the logins, all that stuff." I said, "Did you read the separation agreement?" He said, "What?" I said, "The agreement they want me to sign. Did you read it?" Silence. Then, legal handles that. I said, "Then legal should call me." He hung up and called back 11 minutes later, which was approximately how long it took him to find someone from legal to conference in. The legal contact was a contract attorney they used occasionally, not someone I had ever met. She was professional and clearly walking in cold. She asked if I had questions about the separation terms. I said I had several, and that I'd be responding through my own counsel. The silence on that call had a very specific texture. The texture of people who assumed this would be simple, suddenly understanding it might not be. I should be clear about something. I was not plotting destruction. I had not decided to burn the company down, torpedo client relationships, or expose anything to regulators out of spite. What I had decided was that I was not going to sign away my rights in exchange for 2 weeks of pay, and I was not going to spend my final days handing over 4 years of institutional knowledge for free, while my brother nodded along and later described the transition as something he handled. What I did instead was professional and exhaustive and, I think, the thing that revealed more about my family than anything I could have said out loud. I built a transition document, not a casual email. A formal, time-stamped, 73-page operational handoff package covering every system, credential, vendor relationship, renewal deadline, compliance requirement, and technical dependency that had been living under my name. I documented everything in the kind of precise, jargon-accurate language that is only useful if the person reading it already knows what they're looking at. My brother does not know what they're looking at. I sent it to my sister, the company's registered agent, and the outside accountant. I did not walk anyone through it. I noted in my cover email that I was available for a formal paid consulting engagement at my standard rate if the company required additional transition support beyond what the document contained. I did not hear back from my sister for 4 days. On day 5 of my notice period, the first real problem surfaced. Hargrove Manufacturing, our largest client, sent a routine EDI acknowledgement request that required a response from our integration contact within 48 hours, or their system would flag us as non-responsive and pause invoice processing. The integration contact was me. The alert went to my inbox, which I still had access to for 3 more days. I forwarded it to my sister and brother with a note indicating the deadline, the required action, and the page number in my transition document where the steps were outlined. I did not complete the action myself. It was no longer my responsibility, and completing it would have made it too easy to pretend the transition was going fine. My brother called within the hour. "Can you just handle this one?" he said. "It's literally just a response, right?" I said. "It's outlined on page 34 of the transition document. The login credentials are on page 35. He said, "Maya, come on. You know how this stuff works." I said, "I did. And I documented all of it. Is there a specific part of the document that's unclear?" He said some things after that which I won't repeat, because the words weren't interesting, only the panic underneath them. I said, "I'm sorry this is stressful. I hope the transition document helps." And I hung up. My sister sent an email that evening. It was professionally worded in the way that only people who are furious and trying not to show it write emails at 9 p.m. She said the separation process had become unnecessarily complicated and that she hoped we could resolve it professionally. I replied that I agreed, and that I looked forward to hearing from my counsel regarding the separation terms. I want to be precise about the timeline after that, because precision was sort of the whole point. Day 7. The cybersecurity monitoring system sent its weekly vulnerability summary to my inbox. My inbox was still active. I forwarded the report to my sister's assistant and noted that 2 of the flagged items required attention before the end of the month. I included the vendor's contact number and the relevant page in my transition document. Day 9. The Federal Audit Tool renewal came up as a pending item in my email. 62 days out, but the kind of thing that needs to be transferred before the renewal hits. I flagged it by email and directed them to page 58 of the transition document. Day 10. The Carrier Compliance Database generated a batch of expiring insurance certificates, 14 carriers with documents due for renewal in the next 30 days. If those carriers moved loads for us with expired certificates, we were exposed to liability and potential DOT audit flags. The automated alert went to me. I forwarded it with a note and the relevant documentation. My last day arrived. My sister asked, through her assistant, if I would be coming in to say goodbye. I said I preferred not to. She called me that afternoon herself, the first time in 10 days. Her voice had a quality I had not heard from her in years, not since we were teenagers and she had broken something she wasn't supposed to touch. "Maya," she said, "we need to talk about the Hargrove integration." I said, "Okay," she said. The EDI connection dropped. Hargrove's system paused invoice processing 2 days ago, and we didn't know until their AP team called this morning. I looked out my apartment window at the parking lot below, and waited. She said, "We need you to fix it." I said, "What does page 34 of the transition document say?" A very long pause. Then, "I can't make sense of it. I need you to walk me through it." I said, "I'm available for consulting at my standard rate. I can send you an engagement letter." Her voice changed then. It got smaller in a way that had nothing to do with volume. She said, "You're really going to do this?" I said, "I'm going to conduct myself professionally." She said, "I did what was best for the company." I said, "I know you believe that." Then I said, "Goodbye," and I meant it more than she probably understood. The Hargrove situation resolved itself in the way these things do when nobody at the top actually knows what they're doing, slowly, expensively, and with a lot of unnecessary phone calls to a vendor who charged by the hour. The integration came back up after 3 days, but not before Hargrove's AP director sent an email to my sister expressing concern about the vendor relationship and requesting a service review call. The carrier compliance issue was messier. 4 of the 14 carriers with expiring certificates ran loads before anyone at ClearPath caught up with the documentation. 2 of those loads were flagged during a routine shipper audit by one of our mid-size clients. The client paused new load assignments pending a compliance review. My brother tried to manage it. He sent emails that used words like synergy and robust process in contexts that made the client's logistics coordinators respond with follow-up questions my brother could not answer. One of those coordinators eventually asked to speak with whoever had previously handled their account from a compliance standpoint. My brother told her that person was no longer with the company. She sent back a 2-word reply. I see. 3 weeks after my last day, the backup server's 2-factor authentication prompted a recovery verification. The recovery contact was still my phone number. I received the text, documented that I had received it, and forwarded the information to the company's registered email with a note that the recovery contact needed to be updated, and the process for doing so was on page 61 of the transition document. My sister called that night, not from her work phone, from her personal number, which she used when she didn't want the call logged. She had been crying. I could tell because her voice had the specific flatness that comes after, not during. She said, "I need to know if you're trying to destroy us." I said, "No, I'm not." She said, "Then why won't you just help?" And that was the sentence that told me everything about how she had understood our entire professional relationship. Help. As though 4 years of unpaid overtime, of being the person she called at 9 on a Friday night when a client threatened to terminate, of being the person who rebuilt our data infrastructure after the breach scare, of being the person whose name was on literally every critical system, as though all of that had been help. A favor extended indefinitely. A contribution without category. I said, "I did help. For 4 years. And then you eliminated me from the organizational structure in front of 62 people without a conversation." She started to say something about the business needing to evolve. I said, "I'm going to stop you there, because I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think before you answer." She went quiet. I said, "What did you think I was doing? When you called me at 9 p.m. on a Friday about the Grantley account? When I rebuilt the server protocol? When I caught the breach vulnerability? What did you think that work was?" The silence went on long enough that I looked at my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then she said, "I thought you were being part of the family." There it was. The whole architecture of the thing, laid bare in one sentence. She thought my expertise was love. She thought my time was loyalty. She thought my professional competence was something families offer each other freely and without account, the same category as bringing a casserole or watching someone's dog. It never occurred to her that she was running a company on labor she had simply reclassified as family feeling to avoid paying for it. I said, "I was part of the family. I was also an employee with a specialized skill set that your company needed. Those 2 things can both be true. You chose to eliminate one of them without addressing the other." She didn't have an answer for that. I said, "The consulting offer is still open. Jordan can work with your attorney on the separation agreement. I hope the transition document is useful." Then I said goodnight, and I meant that too. I want to tell you about the family group chat, because that is where the real architecture of a family's self-image lives. For 3 weeks after my termination, the chat had been quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people who talked enough in real life that they didn't need the thread. The deliberate quiet of people managing a story. Then my mother posted a message asking if everyone was coming to her birthday dinner the following Saturday. My brother replied with a thumbs up. My sister sent a heart. My aunt on my father's side asked about the dress code. Nobody mentioned me. My cousin, my aunt's daughter, who had started at ClearPath as an intern 2 summers ago and knew exactly what I had done there, sent a private message to my phone. It said, "I'm sorry. They're acting like you don't exist. I think they're hoping everyone just forgets the specifics." I replied, "I know. Thank you for saying something." She replied, "For what it's worth, Marco in operations cried when you left. Nobody's supposed to know that, but he told Jess and Jess told me." I saved that message. Not for evidence. Because it mattered. The birthday dinner happened. I did not go. My mother sent a text the next morning that said she'd missed me. I replied that I missed her too, which was true and also not the whole truth, the way those things usually go. The month after that was the one that finally settled it. The state regulatory filing system, the compliance calendar I had built, was set to auto-generate a series of quarterly reports due to the California Department of Transportation. The system sent reminders to the project management platform I had administered, but access to that platform had been reassigned incorrectly during the transition. The reminders went to a defunct inbox. Nobody saw them. The filings were late. Not catastrophically late. Not the kind of late that triggers enforcement action immediately. The kind of late that generates a formal notice, creates a documented compliance gap, and requires a written response from the company explaining the lapse. The kind of thing that sits quietly in a regulatory file and becomes relevant the next time you apply for a license expansion or respond to an audit. My sister called the day the notice arrived. She didn't open with anything accusatory this time. She opened with, "Maya, I need to understand what happened with the CDT filings." I said, "Page 47 through 52 of the transition document covers the regulatory calendar." She said, "I read it." I said, "Then you understand what happened." A pause. Then, the reminder went to a dead inbox. "Yes," I said. She said, "I didn't know it was set up that way." "I know," I said. Another pause. Longer. Then she said something I had not heard from her in so long I had almost stopped expecting it. She said, "I didn't understand what you were doing. I don't mean that as an excuse. I mean that literally. I did not understand the scope of what you managed, and I made a decision that I would not have made if I had understood it." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Why didn't you ask?" She said, "Because I thought I already knew." That's the heart of it, isn't it? Not cruelty exactly, though cruelty was present. Not malice exactly, though the birthday-style disowning in the conference room had its own particular flavor of public humiliation. The heart of it was assumption. The assumption that the reliable person has always been doing what they do and will continue to do it because that is simply their nature, the way water is wet and dishwashers run quietly in the background while everyone else eats dinner. She said, "I'd like to talk about what it would take to bring you back. Not in the same role. I know that ship has sailed. But something structured. Something that acknowledges what you were actually doing." I said, "Have your attorney call Jordan." She said, "Okay." Then she said, "For what it's worth, and I know it might not be worth much what I said to employees about streamlining. That wasn't the whole truth. I was trying to manage the optics of a decision I had already made, and I used language that minimized what you contributed. That wasn't fair." I said, "No, it wasn't." She said, "I'm sorry." I thought about telling her what a real apology requires. Action, accountability, acknowledgement of the specific harm. I thought about the 4 years of 9 p.m. calls and the server rebuild and the regulatory calendar I built and the vendor relationship I had cultivated and the 14 expiring carrier certificates nobody caught for 3 weeks. I thought about the way my brother had called me in the first week and said, "Just fix it," like I was a feature of the building that had temporarily stopped working. I said, "Thank you for saying it." Then I said, "Talk to Jordan." Here is what happened in the 3 months after I left ClearPath Logistics. My brother's title remained VP of Technology and Operations. His actual function in that role became attending meetings and sending emails that other people had to follow up on. A contractor was hired to manage the EDI integrations. The contractor charged more per month than my annual salary had been. The carrier compliance database was transitioned to a third-party service, which also cost more than what my role had cost. The cybersecurity monitoring was consolidated under the IT contractor, adding to the cost. The federal audit tool was renewed on time, but only because Jordan had negotiated that knowledge transfer as part of my separation terms. Jordan negotiated well, for the record. The Hargrove account remained, but on probation terms that required quarterly service reviews. The mid-size client who had paused load assignments resumed them after 6 weeks, following a compliance documentation review that the outside contractor completed, using the template I had built and left in the transition document. 2 members of the operations team resigned in the first month. 3 more had informal conversations with me through a mutual professional connection, asking about my plans. I told them honestly that I was consulting and that if I built something, I would be in touch. I built something. Not immediately. I spent 2 months consulting, taking on small compliance and systems projects for other regional freight companies through a referral from Jordan's network. I learned that my skill set was more portable and more valuable outside my family's building than it had ever felt inside it. Companies paid promptly. They said thank you with specificity. They did not call at 9 p.m. and expect the inconvenience to dissolve under the category of family obligation. By month 3, I had registered an LLC, signed a services agreement with 2 clients, and hired my cousin as a part-time junior associate. She gave notice at ClearPath the day after I made the offer. My sister called me about that, but I let it go to voicemail, and it was the first one I didn't return. My brother sent a text sometime in month 4. It was long for him, which meant it was 4 sentences. The gist was that things were harder than expected, that he was learning a lot, and that he guessed he hadn't realized how much of it I'd been carrying. I read it twice, not because it healed anything, because it confirmed everything I had already known, which is its own kind of satisfaction, not warm, but clean. My mother and I had lunch in month 5. We didn't talk about the company directly. We talked about her garden and a documentary she had watched, and the fact that my father's back had been bothering him. It was the kind of lunch where 2 people agree, without saying so, that some things are going to stay complicated for a while. I drove home afterward and sat in my car in the parking garage for a few minutes, not crying, just adjusting. My sister and I have a working relationship now. Formal, specific, bounded by a consulting agreement that Jordan reviewed. She treats me like someone she respects, and is also still slightly afraid of, which is an arrangement I can work with. She has not called from her personal phone since that night. My brother and I don't have a relationship yet. We might, eventually. Or we might not. I've stopped treating that as a problem I'm responsible for solving. Here is what I know now that I didn't have language for before. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the person who makes things work for people who have decided that you making things work is simply what you are, not what you do, what you are. Like a category, like infrastructure. You don't thank infrastructure. You don't ask how it's doing. You don't consider what it would mean for the walls to decide they were finished. I spent 4 years being ClearPath's infrastructure. I spent 4 years building things under my name that held other people's ambitions upright. I spent 4 years accepting reliable as a compliment and staying invisible because visible would have meant threatening the story everyone had agreed to tell. And then my sister stood at the front of a conference room in front of 62 people and told them I was being eliminated, while I ran her slide deck. I didn't flip the table. I didn't cry until I was alone. I didn't give her the collapse she probably didn't even realize she was expecting. I just documented everything, returned every responsibility to its owner, and stepped out of the space where another version of me had been quietly disappearing for years. They called when things started falling apart. Not because I ruined them, because I stopped holding things together. There is a difference. I know it. I think they are beginning to know it too. And if you have ever been the reliable one, the person whose name is on everything, whose number is the recovery contact, who gets called on Fridays and thanked almost never, I want you to know something. The walls always know what they were holding up, even if the house never does. Thank you for listening. The people in this story are not villains because they shouted. They are something more familiar and more damaging than that. They are people who confused dependability with invisibility, and who learned too late, at too high a cost, that the person keeping the lights on had been standing in the dark the entire time. The lesson here is not about revenge, it is about recognition. What you do has value. What you know has value. And you are allowed to stop giving it away to people who have decided that your competence is just part of the furniture.